Okay, so we're going to talk about grant permissions. How can we do that within Power Automate? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to understand how permissions work in SharePoint. Then we're going to work with a previously created custom level permission group that we have here. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. We're also going to use Power Automate to get the roles. Then we're going to grant the permissions using a group. Okay. So first thing is I'm going to open up here the GitHub, the code, which is grant permissions. I'll have the link in the video description. So basically, when we look here within SharePoint, I'll also put a link here to this Microsoft site, which is very good, talking about permissions in SharePoint. And to me, this image here is what describes best how permissions work within SharePoint within different levels. So when we think here about permissions is when we have a permission on the site level, for example, it gets automatically inherited into a list or library, and from there on it gets inherited, for example, into a folder structure, and then from folder structure gets inherited into an item structure, right? So if we do not have folders, it's going to get inherited directly from list or library into an item level, and that's always automatic inheritance, right? So when we click to create new item in a list, it's going to inherit automatically from what we have within the list or library, right? And that gets inherited from the site, right? So once we break permissions, once we stop inheriting permissions from a list or library level, then that becomes the breakdown of the inheritance right there, right? So if I break the inheritance, for example, on the list level, not everyone can see this specific list. What's going to happen is that that's going to get inherited into the list items itself, the same type of permission level that you set for the list, and from there on, right? So that's why in a lot of cases people just create folders, because sometimes they want some items to have some specific permissions within a library or whatnot. So that's usually the strategy that people do, which is easier. What we're going to talk about today here is how we can automate that through Power Automate, how we can do that through item level permissioning, right? And that's something that becomes very critical when we're doing more important types of automations with our SharePoint sites. So going here into SharePoint, basically I'm just going to look here into a previously created list that we have here, and I have, for example, I already have an item here, right? This item is the item I tested with. I'm just going to create a brand new one right here. So just going to click new, and title is going to be test 1. Just going to save status okay. Just going to hit okay there. So now we have test 1. If I click on here on the 3 dots and I go into see manage access, we're going to see exactly what it has, right? So it has a couple of different permissions. Right here is it has a direct access permission, what people can actually do. I'm going to go into advanced, which is a more precise view of what it has and what I like most, to be honest, because this is the old-fashioned how we see what permissions this item has, right? So it has all these permissions, and basically it has, from test 1 to members, owners, and visitors group all in there, right? All having permissions, different permissions within the same item. So when we think about this, it's just inheriting from the parent, right? Whatever it had. And there's even a little button here to stop inheriting permissions. That's something that we can do manually here, right? But we don't want to do anything manually. We want to leverage certainly Power Automate for that. So let's start our journey here in Power Automate. Let's go to Power Automate, click Create. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the roles. For this site here, I created a specific permission, right? So if you look here, there's specific permission level, contribute no delete that I created for this site. That's within a previous video that I created this with. You can check that in the description as well. And basically we're going to see what is this rule, what's this rule identity, so we can leverage this in different actions that Power Automate provides us with, right? So let's just do an instant cloud flow so we can run manually here and test it out. I'm going to put here grant permissions as our name. I'll select manually trigger a flow as our trigger. I'll hit create. So this is just for testing purposes. Now, for example, I can start with a new step, right? And I'll just go over for a second on what we have available here for actions in SharePoint, right? So we have two different actions. We have one that's called stop sharing an item, and that basically does what Will was talking about, which is stop inheriting, right? So we can certainly leverage this. We only need the ID of the item, so that's going to be pretty easy for us. We're not going to have much trouble to use this. So certainly this is one of the actions we're going to use here in the flow. We're ultimately going to get there. And one other action, I'm going to remove this for now so it doesn't get confusing. And there's also another one which is called grant. So basically it's the grant access for SharePoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about this now. I don't think it's finding anything. Let me just close and redo it. Grant access. It's kind of slow right now. Let me put in SharePoint. Let's see if we find SharePoint. Okay, found SharePoint. So let me see if I can find. Okay, grant access. Okay. So grant access. Usually people would say just use this one. I'll tell you, you have two options. We're not going to use this option today, but I wanted to talk about grant access for a second. So grant access basically lets you define specific roles that you can grant to an item specifically within your site. The difference is that, for example, a lot of times when we talk about SharePoint, people are not dealing directly with the roles itself. People want to grant based upon group level permissioning. The group level permission does not happen here. Here it happens the other level permission, right? So here it happens actually the contribute, no delete, the edit, the full control, the read, right? So if we're going to leverage this here within our flow, what's going to happen is it's going to make an item contribute, no delete, and that for you might solve your day. You know, a lot of times this might solve your problems and everything else, no big deal. But I'll say for the majority of the cases, this is not it. For the majority of the cases, is the other way around. People want to use groups instead, because on groups you have the ability to come here within a group and say, well, I want these 5 folks to be part of this, and they can have permissions of contribute, no delete, for example, on these 5 items, for example, right? And then in the future, I want to just change this. I'll just go within the group and I'll change people inside this group here. So, you know, I don't have to run any flows to fix anything. I'll just change based upon the groups, changing who is within each bucket within each group, right? That's usually the use case that people use SharePoint with. So I'll recommend this only if it's a very light situation in terms of permissioning. I'll say probably you do not want to use this with what you're doing, to be honest. So you probably want to leverage the group leveling situation, which is what majority of people want to do, especially when you have the capabilities and the power of SharePoint. So I'm just going to remove this for a second. We're going to use send HTTP for this case because there's no box API available that we can use groups for within Power Automate. So we will leverage send HTTP in a bit. But right now we're just going to get the roles. We're going to focus on that initially. So The first step is that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on new step. It's going to be send HTTP as well, because that's the only way that we can actually get the roles. So I have here the code here on my on the GitHub. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this here in a minute. So I'll just select the site, click on the arrow. It's loading the sites for us, right? If the site's not there, enter custom value. You can paste the site in. It'll work the same way. I just don't like typing things in. I like selecting, so I'm just going to select test. And for the URI, I can paste what we just copied there from the GitHub. It's going to be a get, right? So everything's fine here. I can just put in, this is as get, for example, get roles. Okay. I can put in here a new step, which can be compose. That I want to debug and see what's going on with the get roles. Okay. So I'll just put the body here. I'm going to save it. I'm going to run a test. Test, manually test, continue, run, done. So if we look here, we got the usual D results, which is the data structure that we said we would want. And we also got some descriptions here, right? So that's also part of what we want as well. But we want this one, we want contribute, no delete. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter out the D results to get where description equals contribute, no delete. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit. I'm going to add another action here. I'm going to filter array. And basically when we think about this, we need to get the ID, right, of the role. That's our whole objective here. So first thing is we're going to get the body of the get roles. So body, right, get roles where the results. Okay, I have this here as well. On the GitHub, you just copy and paste. Going back here into the flow. So what we're going to get is we're going to go into expression. We're going to get the current item, which is iterating on, and we're going to get the description. That's the field that we saw that we can filter by, and we want to filter by contribute, no delete. Okay. So now here, what I can do is, instead of filter array, I can say this is role. This is the one role that we want. And here in the compose, I can say an expression that we want body from role. And it returns for us an array. It's not just one. So I'm going to put first. So we just filter out for one specific case. Then I'm going to do, we want the ID. Okay, that's what we want back to use. I'm just going to hit save. I'm going to hit test now. Manual execution. Run flow. Good. So now we filtered out and we got the role number from the contribute no delete. So we can leverage that within our send HTTP. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to put it here in the notepad for a second. Leave this aside. And I'm just going to edit now. And now we don't need this anymore, right? Because we already got the information. So I'm just going to delete everything that we just did. You're going to be like, no, I just did a lot of work. Well, you only need this information once because this is permanent information, right? This is not dynamic. This permission level is not changing all the time, right? It's something fixed there from a SharePoint configuration perspective. So we don't need this to be going on forever, right? So I have here the other little code that we're going to use. So I'm already going to copy this out, and guess what? We're going to use send HTTP. Yep, we're going to use that again like I talked in the beginning. So we're selecting here the site again. We're doing the test site. And here we're going to paste the URI. So URI here is a little bit more complex than what we're used to, right? So here we have to put in the list name. So I'm going to put in versions, right? It's called versions, okay. Item ID. So item ID is what? Right, so let me close this out. I want to see this. Oh, the ID is 2, okay. So the ID is 2 from SharePoint perspective. And then I want to assign a group ID, right? So what's the group ID? So for me to see what the group ID is, I have to go into permissions, right? So I have to go into site permissions. I have to go to advanced, and then I have to click inside the group. Here in the URL we have the group ID, right? So it's 15. So I'm going to put in 15. And then the role ID. The role ID is what we just put. We put it here in the notepad. I'm going to copy this, put it back in. And this is a get. No, this is actually going to be a post, right? So we need to put a post. So this is called set permissions. But this is not quite right yet because there's something missing. So we forgot about breaking permissions here. Actually, I forgot about it. So let me just put a new step here before this. Add an action. I'm going to put stop sharing, right? So first thing is we break, then we share the permissions with the group. So stop inheriting from parent. So I'm going to put here test. I'm going to put here the library, right? And we saw that the ID is 2. So I'm going to put here ID 2. Just hit save. And now when we run this, the permission is going to change on this item, right? It's going to become the group permission. It's going to become this group specifically that we're talking about here, test 1, 2, 3, right? So let me run here the flow, and let's see what happens. Okay, so everything ran fine, no issues. So now if I go back here into and refresh here, I'm going to refresh this to guarantee that we have the most up-to-date information. So if I go here into test 1 and I'm going to manage access, things already changed. So that means it's looking good. But this interface, remember, it's not good. I'm going to click in advanced to see really what happens. So now we have test 1, 2, 3 as the group here that has permission within this item. Right, so every time that I make changes to test 1, 2, 3, it's going to reflect to this item specifically, right? And they have the permission to do contribute, no delete in this item. So I hope you liked it, and have fun there with your SharePoint item hacking.